get on a Sunday night, but I'm pretty pleased. This is a good crowd. I'm impressed. When famous Italian astronomer and physicist Galileo said that the Earth circulates around the Earth, that was thought to be so crazy that he was under house arrest for 2 years. When Steve Wozniak went to his employer with his new invention, he said, I think we can do something big with this. He was told, nobody wants a personal computer in their house. This is crazy. And he ended up leaving the company. And he met a friend named Steve Jobs. Has anybody ever heard of him? And they formed a new company called Apple. It was kind of successful too. They did okay. When Alexander Graham Bell went to the U.S. Patent Office to get a patent for his new invention, the patent office told him, you are absolutely out of your mind. There's no reason we need to have a telephone in every single city. In every city. That's what he was told at the U.S. Patent Office. When Noah was building a big boat in his yard, everybody thought he was crazy. He was totally insane. Now, the Bible doesn't really give us a whole lot of information about the persecution that he must have faced, but I think we could all agree in here, if you went and built a 500 and something foot long boat in the middle of Willow Springs, first of all, everybody would have to come see it. And everybody would have to see what the idiot building it looks like so that they know who to point at and make fun of next time they see you in town. They were persecuted. And the Bible teaches us that the cross is foolishness to the world. The gospel is foolishness to the world. So why don't people laugh at us? And this is actually a sidebar. This wasn't in my notes. I just thought of this on the drive over here. I wanted to throw this in. Why don't people point and laugh at us when we go to Walmart or wherever we go? Like they did to Noah and like they did, heck, they even hanged Jesus on a cross for some of his crazy things he was saying. Well, I have a couple of theories on that, and then I'll jump neck deep into the story. Does anybody know what story we're covering here tonight? Noah. That's a good guess. Couple of theories, and I'll try to make this short because I've already got probably more material than I need to try to cover over 2 nights. You know how it is when I get up here. Those of you who've been in my class before, but in the United States of America was founded on Christian principles. And I remember all the way back to when I was a kid, and I still see this some today, although it's starting to decrease. Even if you're not a Christian, you respect those that are. If I tell somebody I'm preparing to teach a Bible class when I'm at work, those who are not Christians, they say, oh, that's pretty cool. It's not like that in other countries, and it was not like that in Noah's day. So that's one of the 2 reasons, but the other 2 reasons, when you go into town, your Christianity is not always on full display. Noah's was. He had a 500-foot long boat being built in his front yard. His idiocracy was on full display 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Ours is not so much. That's perhaps a little bit of an indictment on us, I might say. So we are going to talk about Noah and the ark. First of all, this is the introduction still. The introduction is always the hardest part of the class to do. I changed my mind 413 times on what the introduction ought to be. So first, let's talk about what the class is not going to be over the next 2 Sunday nights. I'm sorry, but I had to do it. I'm not going to bash VeggieTales every time I stand up here, I promise. But I'm kind of doing a series on kid classes, and I actually watched that whole Noah VeggieTales the other day, the first VeggieTales I've ever watched in my life. And it's actually pretty good. I wish I would have known how good it was when Peyton was little. I would have had him watching those. That's what it's not. Let's see what it is. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the story of Noah and see what God had in mind there for us to learn from it. It's a great story to use for kids, don't get me wrong. So is Jonah, so is so many other stories. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the earth was like before the flood and what the people on the earth was like before the flood and what led to God's decision to destroy it all. And really, what does that mean when he destroyed it all? When you think of a global flood, how do you see that playing out? I'm going to give you a little bit of evidence from science and a little bit of evidence from the Bible. It was probably quite a bit more catastrophic than even you think. I'm going to use a little bit of the parts of Genesis that leads up to the story of the flood, creation, and some things to kind of set the stage and help us understand the necessity for the flood. And, that's it, for the necessity, why God chose to do that, why he had to do that. And of course, I'm going to talk about Noah and his family. And there's really two overwhelming themes that run throughout the whole flood of Noah. I only put one on my slide there, but faith, I don't know why I did that. I should have put two words there, faith and grace. And I'm going to talk quite a bit about those two things as I go through and what we can learn from the story of Noah about those two things. But first, before we get into the story itself, I want to set the stage on a few other things. And I think I probably said something similar to this when I was talking about Jonah. Before you decide to read a part of the Bible, any part of the Bible, you have to decide from what perspective you're reading it and how you interpret it, especially in the Old Testament, even more so than in the New Testament, because there's a couple of different competing methodologies on how to understand the world that we live in today. The first one of those is trust in the science to prove what happened. So it goes something like this. Wow, this is a neat rock. Let's take this to the lab and invent a machine that'll look at it and tell us how old it is. And that's pretty much all of the evolution science. I'm going to try to remember to call it evolution science and creation science as I go through this. I might say new earth science and old earth science sometimes, get my tang tangled a little bit. But primarily what we're talking about here is evolution science. They have a theory on everything that happened from the Big Bang all the way up to today and how we got here. And it really all boils down to, the majority of it boils down to the age of the rocks. They hang their hats so much on the age of rocks. They look at a rock and tell how old it is. The machine tells them how old it is. And from that, they build their narrative, if you will. Did you know that one of the most influential books ever written on planet Earth, other than the Bible, is Darwin's theory of evolution? I would say that has had a bigger impact on societies all around the world than any other book ever written. If somebody has a suggestion of a different book, let me know after this, because I think that one is probably just about number one. But did you know that Darwin accepted the scientific theory that the world is 12.7 billion years old before he wrote the theory of evolution? So he said, if the world's 12.7 billion years old, then I can use that and figure out where man came from. Most of his theory is where people came from, not where the rocks came from. So he accepted a 12.7 billion year old Earth before he wrote the theory of evolution and came up with the survival of the fittest and all of that. The other theory is trust in what happened first, and that'll help you better understand the science. This is the creation scientist. And as I started to study this, I found out there's way more of those out there than I realized. Ken Ham is not the only one. He's the one that built the Ark exhibit in Kentucky. The Ark, what's that called? The Ark Encounter. There you go. The Ark Encounter in Kentucky is Ken Ham, but he's not the only one. There's tons of scientists out there that are brilliant scientists and brilliant theologians at the same time, and they trust in what happened. So where did they find out what happened? Right here. This is a perfect historical account of everything that happened. And of course, there's a lot of details left out, but that's where the science comes in. So if you know that the world is about 4,000 years, or man was invented, Man was created 4,000 years BC, roughly. 4,004 is what most of them say. If you already know that, and you already know that the world was created right before that, so the world is about 6,026 years old now, if I'm doing the math right. So if you already know that and you get this neat rock and you go invent a machine and you stick the rock in there and it says 12.7 billion years old, you say, nope, that's not right. You already know that. So if you trust in the history first, you'll arrive at significantly different conclusions than you will if you trust in did I say that right? If you trust the history first, with those two techniques, you'll get different answers. There you go. That's what I'm trying to say. Did you know that scientists can also, and this will be a little more significant later on in my discussion, scientists have agreed, both creation scientists and evolution scientists, they can track all of mankind back to one set of parents. That didn't come along until the last, I don't know how many dozen years or so. Before that, the evolution scientists would not have agreed to that. And I think they significantly regret the name they gave to the first woman that everybody can trace back to as mitochondrial Eve. And they think, God, I wish we had not used that name Eve. And all of the males can be tracked to Y chromosome Adam. Again, a big mistake on the part of the evolution science. But that's where we're at today. And also, here's another thing I learned in studying all of this, is every single element necessary for human life, or any life for that matter, is found in the dirt, right out there in the parking lot. Every single element. And so how would they have known that when they wrote the book of Genesis? One of those things to think about. There's a lot of science to prove the biblical accounts, and I certainly, if ever I'll stand up here and get outside my comfort zone, I'm out of it right now. My comfort zone is over there, and I'm over here. Science is not my strong suit. I'm not an evolution scientist. I'm not a Christian scientist. I'm not a DNA expert, but I'm going to try to use a little bit of it to prove a few things to help reinforce the flood story that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So here's another thing that we have to, I said all that to say this. We have to decide which one of these bandwagons we're going to get on. Are we going to trust the science first to tell us where man came from, or are we going to trust the historical account to determine, to better understand the science? But before you answer that question, you have to answer this one as well. Is Genesis history, or is it poetry? A lot say that it's poetry. Some say that it's satire. There's a lot of different theories abound on everything in the Bible, really. But if you believe that Genesis is a historical account, then it makes it a little bit easier to pick between which of the other two methodologies. So how can you trust, for example, how could you trust the history first if you don't believe that this is history? So is it or is it not? That's something we have to decide. Do we have rock solid proof? No, probably not. But one thing I want to share with you, I recently watched a documentary called Is Genesis History? Has anybody seen Is Genesis History? Nobody? That surprises me. Watched a little bit of it. It is fantastic. I got some of my information, and kind of helped me organize my outline a little bit here of the things I'm going to talk about tonight from that documentary. But this fellow named Del Tackett goes around and he interviews a bunch of archaeologists, a bunch of geologists, a bunch of DNA experts. But he also goes to Dr. Stephen Boyd, which is the professor of Hebrew, I think that's his whole title, at the Hebrew Union College, I believe that it's called. Yeah, Hebrew Union College. So that's a college with multiple campuses in the United States and in Israel and in Europe. And basically the prime objective, or the prime mission of this college is kind of like they train Jewish rabbis. So when this fella, who's the top of the heap on Hebrew at a college that teaches Hebrew, he reads Genesis in Hebrew. He thinks he understands in Hebrew. He speaks in Hebrew. He probably dreams in Hebrew, although he speaks very good English. I don't know what his nationality is, but if there's ever been anybody that understands Hebrew, I would say he's the guy. And Del Tackett went and interviewed him, and he said some fascinating things, but one thing he said is all the authors and all Hebrew scholars worldwide basically agree on one thing, that the authors of Genesis, and notice I didn't say author, Moses is widely accepted as the author of the entire Pentateuch, but I don't think he was the only contributor to the Pentateuch. I think he might have been the organizer of it, but he was not the only author. He didn't write every bit of it. First of all, how could he have written down where he got buried, okay? So, anyway. Yeah. So, anyway, that's a sidebar. So, he said the authors of the book of Genesis, you can tell from their language and from everything and from an entire lifetime. This guy studied this his entire life. They truly believe they were recording a historical account. This is not poetry. So what in the Old Testament is poetry? In the Psalms, Proverbs, there's some in there. There's some in the Song of Solomon. There's some in Ecclesiastes. Genesis is not written like any of that. There's no similarities between Genesis and the Psalms. It's completely different. It's written as a historical account, and that's widely accepted amongst all Hebrew scholars worldwide today. So, given that, if I've now convinced you that this is a historical account, we have to decide which option 1 or option 2 do we believe. No, not yet. Crud. So, having said that, let me ask you this question. Have you ever thought about this one before? Why is evolution so important to the anti-Christian establishment? Why do they hang their hat on? Why is this such a big deal to them? Did you want to? It does. It very much devalues human life. I have a theory. I'll try to explain it this way. If you go to, and there's been people that have attempted this before. You take the missionary journeys that the Apostle Paul went on, for example, and you go out there with a stopwatch and a tape measure, and you figure out where all the cities were, and you prove, rock solid proof that there's no way Paul could have walked from here to here in this amount of time. He's lying. This is all lies. It's not, obviously. We all know it's not. But let's just say for fun, you prove it rock solid. God's still up there, though. Maybe we accidentally got the wrong epistles into the Bible. We're humans. We can make mistakes. I don't think that, but I'm just saying we can survive something like that. Well, what if we prove rock solid evidence Jesus was not crucified? Well, we might have picked the wrong Messiah, but we're still waiting on the Messiah like the Jews, but God's still up there. We have a creator God up there that loves us, even if we got the Messiah wrong, which we didn't. I promise you, don't go printing an article in the paper, Steve McClure thinks Jesus is not the Messiah, okay? But the point being, if you prove anything else in the Bible wrong, God's still up there. But if you prove Genesis, where is it? I thought I had Genesis 1-1 on there. Maybe I just was going to plan to read it. What does Genesis 1-1 say? That God created the heavens and the earth. I'm going to make a bold statement. If I give you my opinion, I'll try to remember to tell you it's my opinion, and this one's my opinion. If you don't believe Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 1, then you're wasting your time reading the rest of it. You're absolutely wasting your time. Because if the first verse in there is a lie, why would you even read the rest of it? If I open up a book about the World War II, in the first chapter I see, well, I know these are lies. I'm closing the book and putting it back on the shelf. Why would you even bother to read it if you don't believe Genesis 1-1? And the evolutionists, they know this. And that's why, in my opinion, evolution is so important to these people, to prove that God did not create us. So if we weren't created by God, then what do we have? What have we got? What does all this mean? It means that the rocks are 12.7 billion years old. We've had it wrong all along. And mankind emerged out of this primordial ooze of salt water or whatever, and this single cell popped up and it evolved into all of these things and led to where we're at today. That's the truth of it all. And we die and rot in the ground, and that's the end. And that's what they want us to believe, though, right? Does any of you believe that? I sure hope not. So what does all this have to do with Noah? I promise you we're getting there. Because I want to try to prove to you some facts about the flood. But in order to believe me about the flood, we have to decide whether we're going to believe science first or whether we're going to believe history first. Dr. Boyd said, and this is a pretty profound statement, that's not strong enough to lean on. He made a pretty profound statement that Christianity is rich in history. We can know a lot of stuff. And if we follow the history first and then apply the science to it, we can know even drastically more stuff. There's a lot of stuff we can know. We can know exactly where man came from. We can know exactly where it all went wrong. We can know what God's plan was when he created that first man, and we're going to talk about that. And we can know where he went wrong. We can know all this stuff about the flood. We don't know exactly every detail of the ark, but we can get pretty close. I mean, there's so much stuff we can know. Isn't that amazing that we serve a God like that? Let's talk about what the earth itself was, the ball of dirt that we're standing on. Let's talk about it, and then we'll talk about the people next. There it is. It's right there. Why didn't you guys tell me it was coming up on the next slide? I couldn't remember. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Let's go back to Dr. Boyd that I was just talking about. And here's a point that he made about that. He talked a lot about that verse. I really encourage you to watch this. It's an amazing documentary. They do better, a little better than me at explaining this stuff. Not much better, but a little better. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, the first 11 chapters of Genesis gives us a lot of beginnings. Have you ever thought about that? All the things that started with the book of Genesis. I've got a list over here, and add to the list if you want to, anybody that wants to. It tells us right there in that verse, heaven, this is the beginning of heaven, the heavens, the beginning of earth, animals. We love animals. We have several of them in our house, pet them all the time. It's the beginning of marriage, was in Genesis. The beginning of sin was in Genesis, right? The beginning of grace is in Genesis. And that's one of the most foundational things for Christianity right there. It started right off in Genesis. The beginning of controversy begins right here on this particular verse, because there's a lot of arguments about what does heaven mean and what does earth mean, and I'll talk about that next. The beginning of atheism and paganism started in Genesis. The beginning of murder, there's a couple of those in Genesis. There's 4 different covenants, promises from God, covenants between man and God in Genesis. Anything else I'm missing? The beginning of birth. There you go. That's a great one. I didn't think about that. The first births were in Genesis. The first rain is in Did somebody say rain? Plants. Plants in Genesis. The beginning of everything. Light and dark. The first day, the first night. So what does the word Genesis mean? Beginning. It's the beginning of everything. It's all right there. It's an amazing book to read. So what does heaven mean and what does earth mean? According to Dr. Stephen Boyd, the Hebrew language does not have a word for universe. And that causes the atheists and the non-Christians to battle and debate and point at us and laugh and call us names and all that. It says that he created heaven. It doesn't say that he created, there's a big debate over what that means, but there's not a Hebrew word for universe. It doesn't exist. So the way Stephen Boyd explains it, and he understands the true meaning behind all the Hebrew words, really the best way to say it is he created everything up there and everything down here. That's exactly what it means. The heaven is everything up there. The earth is everything down here. The dirt, the water, us, the plants. He created it all. That's what it means. There's the end of that controversy. But we're talking about the antediluvian earth. What does antediluvian mean? Anybody want to take a poke at that? He does. What does that mean? Pretty close. Ante means before, and diluvian means what? Flood. So this is before the flood. I know I could have said pre-flood, but that's a much cooler word, right? I mean, think about how smart y'all think I am right now because I used that word, antediluvian. Yeah. So what was the antediluvian? What was the big ball of dirt that we're standing on? What was it like before the flood? Between creation and the flood. A few clues we can get here. We can't know everything about it, but we can know a few things. Look in Genesis. Let's stand a little closer. I can read it better. Genesis chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so, and God called the firmament heaven." So what's firmament? Anybody know what firmament is? It's the sky. It means a space where there's nothing. It's the sky. That's where the birds fly. But what's interesting about that verse is the reason I threw it in here. It talks about the waters above the firmament and the waters below the firmament. Now, if I go out, and of course it's dark, so I can't use this example. I was going to go over there and look out the window and look up, but if I forgot it would be dark. So never mind that little act I was going to put on. But I go out there and look up. I don't see any water above the firmament, do you? I mean, I see clouds up there, but that's not what it's talking about. I mean, I could give you a little class on how clouds are formed because I'm a pilot, but that's outside the scope of this class. But I could tell you that's not what this verse is talking. It's not talking about clouds. We get clouds on the ground too, and call it fog. It's the same thing. So what's this water above the firmament? Anybody ever given any thought to that? What does that mean? I'll get to that here in just a minute. Just a few other things that it says in the first few chapters of Genesis about water, and then I'll tell you why I'm focusing on that so much. In chapter 1, verse 9, it says the waters were gathered into one place. Now, some of the Bible scholars that I read thought that all the water was underground. I don't think I buy that. I think we had one big Pangea, one continent. And if you're good at puzzles, you can look at the globe and see how they kind of fit together. You know, some of it's underwater now, some of it broke off, but you can kind of see how it all fits together. I believe that we have no biblical evidence of that at all. It's all comes from science. But we do have some biblical evidence of the water. And there was significant amounts of water underground. I do not buy that it was all underground. I don't think the whales lived underground, okay? I don't think the alligators lived underground. I think there was a huge ocean that covered most of the earth, but there was a significant amount of water underground. Look at the next thing it says in chapter 2, verse 5. God had not caused it to rain, so it had never rained on earth before. And I find that to be pretty significant when you start talking about the faith of Noah and his willingness to take on a project that nobody had ever done before, to escape a judgment that nobody ever heard of before. That's a massive amount of, all of the patriarchs throughout the Bible, everybody we study, you make this list, I've seen it labeled this way even, the titans of faith. I think there's a book called that. And it talks about Abraham and this guy and that guy. The only one who didn't have a massive failure in his faith was Noah. I mean, he planted a vineyard and got drunk, but his faith didn't fail though. He messed up, but his faith never failed through all of this story. I think if you ever want to call anybody a titan of faith, this is the guy. But that's another sidebar. So God had not caused it to rain, but it says in chapter 2, verse 6, a mist went up and watered the ground from underneath. So the plants and the animals got their water it rose from underground. So there's significant amounts of water. There's still some water underground today. We dig wells to get water into our houses. But I think there was massive worldwide underground supply of water. And we'll see that when it starts raining too. It says a river went out of Eden, and I think that means it came up from within the garden and formed a river and flowed out. I think there was 4 rivers around Eden, if I remember right. But this particular one came up. The whole river came up out of the ground in Eden and then flowed away, and it nourished the land. And in chapter 7, when it starts raining, you'll see God open up the fountains of the deep. So there's a lot of information about water. One of them says the water above the firmament and the water below the firmament. 2 different layers of water. And this has led some Bible scholars today to put together what they call the dome theory. So it's not really a dome. It goes all the way around the earth, but there's a layer of water up there. So what would this water do? It would filter out all of the UV radiation from the sun. So, which would probably not be the only reason, but certainly a contributing factor. I don't know. I cannot give you a class on exactly what UV radiation does to the human body, but I do know that it's bad. That's why they make you they don't make you. That's why the sunscreen industry is $1 billion industry, because UV radiation on your skin is bad. So the length of time that people lived in those days was helped out by the fact that all the UV radiation was filtered out. Another thing is there would have been a uniform atmosphere if there's a layer of water that filters out the UV and holds in the temperature. Have you ever noticed that when the sky is clear in the winter, it's a lot colder than when it's overcast? Because the overcast, the clouds hold the heat in, the radiant heat. So if you cover the entire earth all the way around the firmament with a layer of water, and I don't know how deep this water would have been, but it was deep enough to accomplish God's purpose for the earth in those days. I do know that. But the atmosphere would have been uniform. There was no rain, a constant temperature. There's no summer, winter, fall, none of that. And the poles and the equator would be about the same, right? Because it's all like it's like in a little containment dome. I learned this, ironically, I've been flying for 30 years, and I just heard this for the first time just a few days ago, and I thought, wow, I'm going to use this in my class. It fits perfectly. Did you know that airline pilots, the number one reason that they lose their medical is because of skin cancer on the face? Because they get in their plane and they fly up there at 30,000 feet where the atmosphere is thinner, and the sun coming through the windshield of their aircraft causes skin cancer on their face. That's the number one cause. So you filter out that UV radiation. We have to use sunscreen or shade or something else to filter it out. But there used to be a layer of water that filtered it out. So a little bit different than the world is today, would you say? One guy said, and I'm not sure exactly how far I buy into this, but enough that I threw it up there on the screen, there would have been no need for houses because we don't have to protect ourselves from the elements. We don't have to protect ourselves from seasons, and the same thing with clothes. And that's why when the atheists go out there and dig, they don't find any evidence of society from before the flood. They didn't build the same way that we do today. That's why the houses they built would have been minuscule, rudimentary, out of mud bricks, and they all faded away when it flooded. In the book of 2 Peter, chapter 3, verses 4 through 6, Peter talks about this very thing, about how different the world was in those days to what the world is like today. He's talking about, he had just mentioned that there'll be scoffers in the last days. And these scoffers are saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they are willingly ignorant of, that by the word of God the heavens were of old. Of old means they are no longer there. They're no longer the same. And the earth standing out of the water and in the water, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. The world perished. And for this, he talks about they're willfully ignorant that it perished. They're willfully ignorant that it was different then than it is now. I mean, up until I started studying for this, I thought, well, the earth was like that. It flooded and then the water went away and then it was still like that. No, it was nothing like that. It was a completely different planet in those days. And that's what messes up a lot of the evolution scientists when they study things, is they just aren't willing to accept that the world was drastically different in those days. That word perished, the Hebrew word for that is apollomai. It means to destroy fully, literally or figuratively. In this case, it was literally. It was destroyed. There was catastrophic destruction to this planet when that flood came. Whoops, I went one too many. How do you go back? Just a little more evidence of the difference in what the world was like then compared to now. This just blew my mind. It fascinated me. Maybe you're not as much of a nerd as I am, but this is the Aransai Fine Map. It was drawn by a man named Piri Reis. He was a Turkish admiral in the 1500s. This map was found in a library in Greece, but it was widely accepted to believe that it was initially recovered and taken to Greece from the archives in Nineveh that I talked about when I taught the Jonah class. I'll think of the name of the king. I can't think of the name of the king anyway, but he created this library with 22,000 something volumes in it. A massive find when the archaeologists dug this up. It ended up in Greece. But anyway, that's beside the point. This is a picture of the map itself. And I know you can't tell a lot by the map, but the original map, the whole thing, had this huge border around it with Piri Reis's handwritten notes. And on that, he put where he got all of his information to draw his map. The source maps that he used are widely accepted to be to date pre-Jesus, and some of them as far as 5,000 years back, and all the experts have agreed that that is where those maps came from. So he didn't go out and explore the whole world. He collected a bunch of old maps, and from that he drew this one. The U.S. Navy cartographers, the kind of the premier on naval navigation, they have accepted, or they've inspected it, and they agree that it's accurate to, the whole thing is accurate to within a half a degree. And here's the fascinating part about it. The technology required to accurately plot latitude wasn't invented for 200 years after this, until 200 years after this map was drawn. So how did he do this? And he got it from sources that were as much as 5,000 years old at the point of time when he drew it. That goes almost all the way back to creation. Now, the dates of some of those maps might be off by a little bit, but the point being, they were pre-flood. Some of these maps were pre-flood, would have been pre-flood. And the reason I got stuck on this and started studying it is it shows Antarctica with mountains and rivers and no ice on it. And it was the map was found in Greece 250 years before Antarctica was ever discovered. So we have a whole continent that's drastically different than it is today on a map 250 years before we even knew this continent existed. And there were similar finds to this one where England was shown covered with glaciers. It has never been covered with glaciers in our lifetime or in modern history at all. And there was another one that showed like dead accurate, almost like a satellite photograph of Norway, Sweden, and Finland, like hundreds of years before those were even discovered by mankind. So where did all of this information come from? So we think, at least I thought, that the civilization before the flood was a bunch of cavemen, Zug make fire, and it was nothing like that. They were very advanced civilizations in those days. And the whole planet was different. Talk a little bit about the people, and I know that's kind of hard to read, so I'll tell you what I had in mind when I put that on there. Some things that we can get from that. Maybe I'll get to use the get it. Oh, well, up there it's much bigger, so I can't read that one, but you can read this one. I wish I had used a different chart. I had a different one in there, and then I deleted it and put this one in. But just a few things I wanted to show you is that we can get from this is the lifespan. These people lived 900 years or more, and today how long does people live? So what's the difference? Why? Most people will just excuse it as, well, God wanted them to live longer so they would make more babies and populate the world. Yeah, that's probably true. But if you look into the science behind all of it, it goes a little deeper than that. Maybe this dome of water, this dome theory, has some merit to it. Don't really know. Maybe not. If you look at, you can see that for 56 years, I guess it would be, everything above Lamech from here up. So from the time between when he was born and when Adam died, there was 9 of the patriarchs all alive at the same time. There's 9 generations of patriarchs. Now there's obviously a lot more people than those 9 people, but there was 9 patriarchs. Lamech was the shortest lived. He only lived 777 years. Why did he only live that long? Because God showed him grace. He ended his life before the flood. I would much rather God take me than die in a flood. I don't know. It's just me. Call me crazy. Lamech was also the only one, and he's the father of Noah. He was the only one to prophesy when his child was born. And I didn't write it down. I can't remember. I can't tell you exactly what he said, but he prophesied something about Noah. I probably should have put that in there, but I didn't. What's that? Yeah, and it's something like that. It was something to that effect. I don't remember the exact wording, but. So when Enoch was translated, the only person that was not alive at that point was Adam. So they had only seen one death at the time Enoch was translated. Now there was other people again, other than there's the only patriarch death that they had seen. And all 10 of these would have been alive to see the wickedness and the evil of mankind that we're about to talk about. All 10 of them would have seen that. Lamech, his father, and Methuselah, his grandfather, would have seen him building the ark. They would have been around when he was building the ark. The rest of them would not have been. The genealogy, this is the genealogy of Seth, the Seth line, the Sethian, Sethite, however you want to. The Cain line, which was Seth's brother, that didn't walk with God. There's quite a bit of stuff in there about them too, but what it doesn't give is time markings. It doesn't say this guy was this old when he had a baby and then died at this. None of that's in there. So you can see a lot of the line of Cain, but with the line of Seth, you actually get you can use it all and add it all up and figure out exactly when things really happened. And from this, we were able to determine that creation happened right around 4004 BC. And we could tell that the flood was 1,600 and something years after creation. That amazes me. 2,348 BC, that's when the flood was, according to most accepted science today. Let's talk a little bit about not the patriarchs, but mankind on earth. I got just enough time, I think, to finish this one. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And it came to pass, when man began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives, all of which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. I highlighted in orange 5 different classes of people I want to talk about, so that we can kind of understand what the world was like, to help us understand why God flooded it. We're not going to get into talking much about Noah tonight, but next week we'll be talking a lot about Noah. But I want to start off with the last one, man. Look at that statement and ponder on that one just a little bit. God's word, I should say, tells it like it is. Now, in my house, we have a tendency, and we do it for fun, to exaggerate things. Like we open the back door and I say, here comes the turkey at 438 miles per hour running over here to get a treat. Of course he's not, it's fun, we do that. God's word does not do that. It tells it exactly like it is. And look how it is. The wickedness was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. When he sat down on the park bench to ponder, his heart was focused on wickedness and evil. When he daydreamed, his dreams were of wickedness and evil. When he made plans with his friends, his plans were for wickedness and evil. When he dreamed at night, he dreamed of wickedness. When he conducted business with his neighbor, it was wicked and evil. Every imagination of his heart was only evil continuously all the time. That is what man on earth was like prior to the flood. Why is it not like that today? I can sum it up with one word. Anybody want to take a poke? Grace. Grace. Or Jesus. I heard somebody say Jesus. Yeah, those two pretty much go hand in hand, right? You could sum it up that way with one word also. Grace. If there was a race of aliens out there somewhere that got their ships done and they're ready to go visit a new society, right? We're gonna fire up these ships and we're gonna head to Earth and see what this is all about. If they read Genesis chapter 6, they would say, nope, never mind. I ain't going there. Those people are crazy. I ain't going there. They're evil. That's all they are, is evil. It's quite an indictment on mankind. It talks about a few other types of people. Sons of God, daughters of men. Who are those? Well, the theories are plentiful on who the sons of God are and who the daughters of men are. And I don't know how many are out there, but there's a lot. And I narrowed it down to what, in my opinion, are 3 possible theories that seem to be somewhat supported by the Bible, and they're not too insane, not too crazy. And I'm going to go over those with you here. The first one I'll call the human theory, and that is that the sons of God are the sons from the line of Seth, human sons of the line of Seth, and the daughters of men are the daughters from the line of Cain. Those who walked with God, those who did not. Intermarried and messed things all up. But the problem with theory number one is everywhere else in the Bible where it says sons of God, it's talking about angels. So I'm not quite sure that I buy into theory number one. Although it has some merit, there's probably some of that going on, obviously. But is that all of what we're talking about here? I don't think so. The second one is the demonic theory. And that is the sons of God were fallen angels who bred with the daughters of men, which were attractive females from either tribe, whoever. And there's a lot of people that feel like that is probably the most likely in line with a strict reading of the scripture. If you just read word for word, interpret what those words mean, that's probably the most likely. But some say, but wait a minute. Jesus said in the book of Matthew, angels are asexual. They don't breed, they don't marry, they're not given to marriage. So let's take a look at that. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 30. I don't have it up there on the slide. If you want to turn to it, Matthew chapter 22, verse 30. He's talking about us, Jesus is. It says, for in the resurrection, so when we're raised to go to heaven, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God. Did anybody open to it? What's the next two words? In heaven. So when we are resurrected, we're not married, we don't marry, we're not given in marriage, we're as the angels were in heaven. It doesn't say the angels that fell to earth. It says the angels in heaven. So it leaves open the door of possibility that the angels that are here on earth, that are demons now, they've fallen angels, they're demons now, they march to their own drum. They have a different set of rules. They don't follow the same rules that the angels in heaven do. It does not say that they cannot breed with humans. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Bible. Unless I'm wrong, if somebody knows where it does say that. Did you have something?
Fleshly came to my mind.
Right. That's right, yes. And that kind of goes along with the next one. And one other verse that seems to support it in chapter 3, verses 4 through 5 of 2 Peter. Hold it up here, I can read it better. It says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned. So right there tells you that everything's meant. What happened to us when we sinned? Everything changed. What happened to the angels when they sinned? Everything changed, right? So God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness. So there seems to be Peter making a connection between fallen angels and Noah right there. So that's circumstantial at best, I'll grant you that, but there is a connection there. And in Jude, there's only one chapter, but in Jude verse 6, it says, the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. They left their habitation. The rules changed for those guys. This is the theory anyway. And then the third one I'll talk about, and we're just about out of time here, is possession. In other words, the demons, the angels that fell became demons, and they possessed the rulers of the world. Now you can't look at some of the rulers of the world that we've had over the recorded history of mankind and tell me some of those people weren't possessed by the devil or by demons. Hitler comes to mind, Saddam Hussein. There's a lot of them. The Genghis Khan and Nero. He was one of the biggest persecutors of Christians, murderers of Christians. You can't tell me that some of those people, and there's examples in God's word where Jesus himself kicked some demons out of some people. He kicked them out of this one guy, and they jumped into these pigs, and the pigs ran into the ocean and drowned. Remember that? That guy was demon possessed. And if you're possessed by a demon, does it not influence the decisions you make? And the rulers of the world in those days perhaps were possessed by demons. They also probably had, it said in that, the verses we had up there a minute ago, it said they chose women, the daughter, I can't remember the exact wording of it, whomever they chose. In other words, it leads you to believe that these rulers, these people who ruled the world in those days, pre-flood days, would have had harems of women and not just one. So one demon or demon-possessed ruler with 100 wives would produce quite a large number of offspring. How many did Genghis Khan produce? Anybody know? I don't know the exact number either, but he had multiple hundreds of wives, and was thought to probably have produced multiple thousands of children. One ruler, if he's demon-possessed, that has an impact, quite an impact on the world in those days, right? And that's what was going on in the pre-flood days. Absolutely. And it said the result of these sons of God and daughters of men produced what? Mighty men, men of old, men of renown. Men of old means they're not here anymore. All right, so they're gone, but what were they like before? Mighty men, men of old, men of renown. These are the people who would have been influential in society because of their wealth, because of their striking good looks, because of their family name, because of their, did I say wealth already? Because of their intelligence, size, all of these things. They were the people that were influential in the world and became rulers within the communities and within the nations and within the world. They were that was the result of the breeding between the sons of God and the daughters of men. Fame, that's the word I was looking for. Fame, name, honor, power. And then what was the result? What was the result of this line of people? Every imagination of the heart was only evil all the time. That's what we ended up with because of all of this. But it talks about giants. Who are these people? What do you think of when we say giants? The biblical word was Nephil. It's only used twice in the whole Bible, and both times it's talking about giants. Who are we talking about when we say giants? Like Jack and the Beanstalk? Is it a big green guy, 14 feet tall, that carried a 300-pound axe? Or what's that? Goliath. He was 9 feet something tall. There's the word, only once in the Bible. The definition of that word when used in the Bible means fellers. That's the primary use, fellers. Well, what's a feller? I don't mean he's a swell feller. It's a guy that cuts down trees, right? He's a lumberjack. These are lumberjacks. They're people that are big, not big in stature, but mighty and strong. Like, I picture more when we say the word Nephil after studying these, more like some of those guys you see on the World's Strongest Man competition. They're short with a low center of gravity and stout and can throw these kegs over a 50-foot wall and carry a big axe. They were bullies because of their strength, but they weren't big. They weren't very much bigger than us. They're not huge like you think when you. So, given that best description I can give you of what a Nephil was, thinking back to your 7th grade science days, what species what subgroup of mankind does that kind of match up to that you remember reading about in science in those days? Any thoughts before I click it? Neanderthals. It's an exact match. That's who the Neanderthals were. They tried to tell you Neanderthals were 437 jagillion years ago, and living in caves, but the Neanderthals were just people that had a little bit bigger bone structure, and they were strong, and they were feared within the community, but they weren't huge. They weren't really big people. This fascinated me too, and then I'll have to end it with this. All of the Neanderthal, or a significant percentage of the Neanderthal bones that have been dug up had significant cuts, slashes, and piercings on them. So that leads us to the question, what's that all about? If you go back to chapter 4 and you look at the genealogy of Cain, you'll find one of his sons' name, or is his son or grandson named Tubal-Cain, was a master of metalwork. So they had spears and swords and knives and arrows and all of this stuff that the Neanderthals and all of the Seth line didn't have. And most creation scientists or archaeologists believe that there was a pretty massive war pre-flood, and almost all of the Neanderthals would have been wiped out, because when you dig up their bones, they all have slashes and cuts and piercings on them. They, as strong as they were, they couldn't stand up to the metal weapons that Tubal-Cain's family had created. I thought that was fascinating to me. Let's see what's next. Yeah, I probably better stop there because that slide will take me a little while to talk about. I know we didn't really, this is a Noah class, and we haven't really even talked about Noah yet, but you'll see the point I'm trying to make is the case for the flood. I'm trying to get you to believe that there was a flood before we actually talk about Noah himself, and we're getting there pretty quick. Any questions or comments from the class tonight so far? Nothing? Wow.
So I thought that was just like super interesting, being close to that biosphere, those gigantic fish. They move. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty neat. This is before the flood. This is like the film.
Right.
This is before the flood, and I just keep thinking, how many more states?
I've tried tonight to get the rest of you as excited about the science behind all this that proves these accounts from the Bible. I know I'm not the best at that. I'm not a scientist, but I'm trying to give you just enough to hook you and get you interested. And we'll get quite a bit more into the flood itself and Noah himself and the family and all of the theology that goes along with that, and grace and faith and everything, quite a bit more next week. Anything else? If you'll bow with me, I'll pray. Father in heaven, as we come to you today, I just thank you for your precious masterpiece that you've provided to us that reveals you and reveals us and so much about the world to us. Father, I can make slides and I can memorize facts and figures, but I can't make it God's word. Only you can do that. And I pray that you've done that here tonight, and that it'll help people to understand, and that next week it'll be even better, and we'll finish up that story. I pray that you'll keep everybody safe in their travels and wherever they're going and wherever they're working, and bring them back here on the next appointed time. It's in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.